All right, so let's start out with the basics. What is a screen reader? So screen readers are powerful software applications that convert text and other web elements on the screen into spoken audio or refreshable braille. I'm going to pause here for just a second. We're all very familiar with the audio functionality of screen readers, but it's really important to also know about the real-time refreshable braille. The screen reader drives a standalone hardware device called a refreshable braille display that generates real-time braille for a braille reader as someone navigates through content. And I think we have a picture of that piece of hardware, if you're not familiar with it, coming up on our next slide. Um, Second thing, screen readers are considered a type of assistive technology, and they're used by folks with disabilities to access content that would otherwise not be perceivable to them. Um, Screen readers are very robust and highly customizable, and this is to suit a wide range of user needs. And screen readers cannot compensate for inaccessible content or bad code. So as powerful and robust as they are, they're only as good as the content they have to work with. Uh, so now that we know what screen readers are, let's talk a little bit about who is most likely to be using one in their day-to-day to access digital content. So first up, we have people who are blind or visually impaired and people who are deafblind. Those are probably going to be the majority of folks you'll find using screen readers. In particular, folks who are deafblind using that refreshable braille display for tactile input may be one of their only ways of consuming digital and online content. Additionally, you might find folks who more easily process information auditorially than visually. Also, folks with a wide variety of cognitive learning or visual processing differences. On to our next slide. Now that we know what they are and who's using them, what screen readers are folks most likely to be using? So according to the most recent WebAIM screen reader user survey, which took place in 2024, the most commonly used screen reader is JAWS. That stands for Job Access with Speech. Close second is NVDA, Non-Visual Desktop Access, followed by VoiceOver, and at number 4, Narrator. I should say that JAWS and NVDA are both Windows desktop screen readers. VoiceOver is the native screen reader for Mac and iOS, and Narrator is the native Windows screen reader that is available. And it's important to know as we look at, which screen readers are being used. Most users in this recent survey indicated that they do use more than one screen reader to meet all of their basic access needs. So it's definitely not a one and done or one size fits all. All right, Kelsey, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. So Heather's talked a little bit about what screen readers are and who uses them. So I want to chat with you about why you should use screen readers in your testing. They're still a really valuable tool, even when recognizing that there are going to be some differences with the native or daily users' use of screen readers. So the first reason is that using screen readers for testing can make certain issues more apparent. For certain types of tests, testing with a screen reader can improve efficiency or improve clarity on that there are pieces of information missing or there are elements in the code that are not working as expected. A common area for me that I like to use screen readers in testing is when I'm checking if a component that has a text label and the accessible name of that component, if they match. So for me, it can be really efficient to test while I'm looking at the visible label, but then listening to what my screen reader is communicating to make sure that those pieces of information are matching. A second reason is that using a screen reader can help catch gaps that might otherwise be missed if you're just doing code review. Screen reader testing can help confirm that interactions and dynamic code changes are working as expected. So definitely I may be able to see that maybe a status message or some other piece of code looks like it's implemented correctly in the code, but maybe there's something wrong with how it's being populated, and that can be really hard to to understand or to notice when looking just at code or when looking just at helpers or other highlighter tools. But when I listen with a screen reader, I can get a sense of, hey, this isn't acting the way that I would expect it to act. Let's do a little bit more investigation about what's going on here so we can make sure this is communicated correctly to our users who are using screen readers. And finally, using a screen reader in testing really helps keep varied user needs top of mind. Many accessibility issues are not visual. There's not a visual indication of the accessibility issue. And if you're a tester who, or an evaluator or auditor who generally interacts with digital content visually, there may be a lot of stuff under the surface that you're going to more naturally miss because it's not your normal mode of interacting with digital content. But using a screen reader can help identify those issues and keep those needs top of mind for users that don't match the way that you typically interact with digital content. So, wanted to talk a bit about getting started on some of the more common screen readers and ones that we would recommend to explore using in your testing. The first is getting started if you're a Mac user on VoiceOver. VoiceOver comes built into Mac devices and typically in testing pairs best with the Safari browser if you're testing content that you view in a browser. We're going to go briefly over the keyboard shortcuts, but would mention, right, this information is available in user guides and other places. So feel free, don't worry about memorizing these now, I would say, but just sort of talk through some of the capabilities and where we would start with using a screen reader. So to turn on VoiceOver on a Mac, you would press Command F5. Or you can go to your system settings, the accessibility settings, and turn on VoiceOver from there. To turn off the screen reader, which is also really important to know, so you're not getting overwhelmed by announcements from your screen reader, you can press the Command key and the F5 key again, and that will turn VoiceOver off. For basic navigations, instructions for VoiceOver usually reference what they call the VoiceOver or VO key. This key combination can be modified in your settings, and the default is the Control Option key. So anywhere where it says VO or VoiceOver key, what it means is using that combination, the default being Control Option, and then whatever other keys that they list. So to read continuously from your current point in the page is VO plus down arrow. To navigate by heading is going to be VO Command H. To navigate by item is VO and left or right arrow keys, depending if you want to go forward or backward. To navigate by interactive item, you can use Tab and Shift Tab. You may be already familiar with using Tab and Shift Tab if you've done testing with keyboard-only navigation. So we mention it that it's one of the strategies that also works with a screen reader, but is far from the only method to navigate with a screen reader. So really important to be aware that there are multiple ways that users can be navigating content with their screen reader. And finally, to activate an interactive item is VO spacebar. For our PC users out there, NVDA can be a great option for testing. It is a separate download. As Heather mentioned, Narrator is the built-in screen reader, but NVDA tends to be a more popular one for testing. And information is that it has a bit higher, market share. There's more users using NVDA compared to Narrator. NVDA is free, but requests donations. Definitely recommend if you or your organization are able to financially contribute to NVDA. They do a lot of great work around the world to support access to digital communication. And JAWS is another PC screen reader option, but it is paid and is on more of a subscription model. So when you start off with NVDA, once you've downloaded it, we recommend follow the setup wizard and use the recommended settings and be sure that you select the correct keyboard layout depending on the device that you're on. So the choice is between desktop or laptop, and you do want to make the correct choice during that setup so that your keyboard navigation or the keyboard shortcuts are going to make sense on your machine. So the other thing to keep in mind is if you are using desktop, that numlock must be off for numpad commands to work. Those are commonly used, so something to be aware of and something that's easy to miss. I mess that up quite a bit. And NVDA pairs best with the Chrome browser for testing. Some of our shortcuts for NVDA to turn it on is Control-Alt-N, or you can activate NVDA from the software shortcut. When you install it, you can create a shortcut on your machine, which can be really helpful. To turn off NVDA is the NVDA key Q. So similar to VoiceOver, there's an NVDA key, which can be modified. The default is insert if you're on the desktop keyboard layout, or it's caps lock if you're on the laptop keyboard layout. So again, brings home that importance of selecting the right keyboard layout during setup. Some of the basic other navigation we have is to read continuously from your current point is NVDA down arrow or the numpad plus key. To navigate by headings is H. To navigate by item is arrow keys. To navigate by interactive item is tab and shift tab, with that same caveat of keep in mind that tab and shift tab is not the only way to navigate with your screen reader, and in testing should not be the only way that you are navigating with your screen reader because you'll miss a lot of the non-interactive content that way. And finally, to activate an interactive item is the enter key. So I'm pass it back to Heather to talk about some things to be aware of as you get started with screen reader testing.
Kelsey? All right, so we're going to go through a list of items here, but I want to just kind of set the stage a little bit and offer some context as we get going. And that is as important as screen reader testing is. It does not necessarily accurately reflect the native or everyday user of a screen reader. So on our next slide here, we have 3 items, which I'll just say what those are, and then we'll talk about each one in a little bit more detail. So the first item here is that most native screen reader users navigate non-visually and do not rely on the screen or their eyes. The second item is non-native testing is valuable, but it does not reflect a native user's experience. And we recommend including real users early and often in your testing process to gain meaningful accessibility insights. So the first one here, when we talk about screen reader testing, it's really important to understand that most native users, as I mentioned, are not interacting or navigating with their eyes or the screen. So this might seem really obvious, but in my experience, for sure, it can often be misunderstood or overlooked when someone who is sighted begins testing. So it's just important to recognize and respect that that difference exists. And so to that end, someone using a screen reader for testing and they're able to see, inevitably their experience is going to be shaped by, to some extent, by what they see. And this is just how our brains work. So they might glance at where they think a button is located or anticipate how something will work or behave based on sight. So for a native user who relies on sound, structure, and tactile feedback, instead of sight, the experience is going to be quite different. And I mean, we don't expect, it doesn't make sense that a non-native user in this sort of testing scenario is going to become fluent like a daily user of a screen reader. But like I mentioned before, it's important to recognize and respect and understand the difference between the two experiences. So the testing with non-sighted, or excuse me, with sighted users is still super helpful, but it should be considered as just one step in the overall accessibility process. And as I mentioned, real accessibility comes from including people with disabilities throughout design and development, early and often, and not just at the end for validation. So working with native users really will give you insight that no amount of simulated testing could capture. All right. And now Kelsey's going to tell us some other things now that we kind of have that context to keep in mind as we start testing.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather. So the other kind of piece that we want to be aware of are some tips for testing with screen readers to make your testing as effective as possible and to do the things that testing is good at in terms of being a non-native user, but using screen readers in testing. So some things to do is first to plan screen readers into your testing process, make a decision and have a plan on when you plan to use screen reader testing. Maybe it's during particular tests. Maybe you want to go through the content overall at the start of your testing process or near the end of your testing process. Definitely different combinations work that can work for different goals or for different folks, but having a plan of specifically when you intend to do it helps ensure that you are incorporating it regularly into your testing practice. The second recommendation I have is to have resources at hand, so things like tip sheets or user guides. I feel like I got a little overwhelmed all the keyboard shortcuts I talked about earlier, and that is such a small subset of the total number of keyboard shortcuts and navigation strategies that are available. So I keep a printed out tip sheet next to my desk because I'm doing this regularly. Having a bookmark page or having a user guide downloaded and readily available on your computer. There's lots of different options available, but definitely recommend having those resources close at hand so that you can really focus on testing and have the instructions right in front of you to use those shortcuts or use those different navigation strategies. Also consider visually blocking your screen during screen reader testing. As Heather was mentioning, if you're typically a visual user of digital content, we gain a lot of visual information from the content, and sometimes it can easy to miss to see information visually and not realize that you didn't hear that information via the screen reader. So some folks like to visually block their screen or use a screen curtain, and that can help with not letting any visual information maybe muddy the waters in terms of testing or things you're trying to test with the screen reader. And finally, we do recommend pairing screen reader testing with code review to not just do one or the other, but to combine them together so that you can hear information or hear how the screen reader is acting or interacting, and then can review it in the code to help diagnose if there are issues or to understand why the screen reader is interacting in a particular way with that content. Some things to know in screen reader testing is that screen reader testing does not replace keyboard only testing. Even though you are using a keyboard while you are using a screen reader, screen readers modify the keyboard navigation, or they can even kind of smooth over and correct keyboard navigation issues sometimes. So you still need to test those two pieces of assistive technology separately, still continue to do keyboard only testing in addition to screen reader testing. Screen readers are also highly customizable by users, but in a testing scenario, we recommend using the default or the beginner settings. This can be helpful for making sure that you're hearing clear information, you're not getting false positives. And also, we do want to be testing for and thinking about content from the perspective of new or inexperienced screen reader users who don't have all the fancy bells and whistles. They don't know all the fancy shortcuts. They may not have all these customized settings. So really making sure that that's being captured in the testing. Also be aware that some issues that you find with a screen reader may be quirks of the specific screen reader or the result of your inexperience as a screen reader user or screen reader tester. So that can be another great reason why we want to pair code review with screen reader testing so that we can help identify where something that seems weird or seems like it's not acting quite right on a screen reader, that we're identifying and diagnosing those issues accurately. And finally, know when to call in the experts. So this is where having user testing with native users of screen readers is really important. And you can use your testing to gather a great set of questions to bring to your user testers. So questions like, does this page organization make sense? Does this interaction work as you would expect? Are the instructions clear and appropriately detailed? So testing can really help you gather a really great and effective set of questions to bring to your user testers who can give you great feedback based on their overall context and experience of how this content is working and what recommendations they would make. And finally, we can talk about how accessible web can help. So we are here to support you throughout your accessibility journey. We have web accessibility software that can help with organizing and managing your accessibility work. We offer consulting and training similar to this webinar, where we can provide guidance on specific accessibility topics, as well as our Accessible Web Academy, which includes an intro course to talk a bit about different types of assistive technologies and how they interact with digital content. We also offer accessibility audits where we do comprehensive evaluations against the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and our methodology does include screen reader testing as part of that audit process. And from those audits, we can create voluntary product accessibility templates or VPATs, which is a type of accessibility conformance report, which essentially lays out how well you are meeting those Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And that brings us to the end of our prepared remarks. So appreciate everyone hanging in there for a